Hello, everyone. Luciano Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, January the 22nd, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream, and let's take a look and see if some of our friends are already over here. All right, taking a look. No messages so far, so let's get started with some updates on currency exchange. The U.S. dollar is losing its strength when exchanged for Brazilian reais. So for the first time, it is dropping below 6 reais per U.S. dollars. Per U.S. dollar, and the record it was actually 6 reais and 20 cents per US dollar. Right now, it is trading below 6 reais. So let's see if the trend remains. Still, a lot of people excited about buying properties in Brazil because of how strong the US dollar still remains, right? Like even with this drop, is still like different from what we've been seeing for the last couple of months. So, all right, we have Sex Dragon. Hi, Sex Dragon. Welcome back. Good to see you over here. Let us know if there are any topics of your interest to be discussed in our live stream. Let's see what else we have. All right, Sex Dragon. I'm a content creator trying to make the digital nomad visa work. If I choose the $18,000 option, would a work contract still be needed? Given Twitch, YouTube doesn't provide one. Yes, Dragon. So that's a frequent question we have in our consultations. And you still need it doesn't need to be a work contract. It could be a letter of verification, okay? But you still need to verify. You still need to provide evidence that you are working, right? And there is a joke we like to share with our clients and viewers, and the joke goes like this. If there wasn't a need for you to prove that you are working, that would not be the digital nomad visa. That would be the $18,000 visa, right? Like meaning that anyone with $18,000 in account could just come to Brazil under the digital nomad. And of course, that's not the intent of this route. And therefore, yes, you do need to show that you're working. We do have a lot of content creators as clients, though, Dragon. Okay, so there are strategies, and the strategy is usually to find someone in our network who you may be already working for, even on a part-time basis, that could verify some type of work that you do. Okay, so we have a client from Tokyo, from Japan, and she creates content for the OnlyFans website. And same situation. Like she was making a ton of money. She had enough money to go through for the $18,000 route, but she would not be able to use whatever service agreement she could download out of OnlyFans, right? Like, so in her case, we asked her the question, like, how are you working for someone else, right? Like, in addition to OnlyFans, she said, well, I do like marketing for my mother's restaurant in Tokyo, but it's not formal work. I said, listen, that's okay. Like, I mean, the Brazilian government, they are not asking for formal work. And like a digital nomad position is actually more suitable for non-formal work, right? So again, the Brazilian government wants you to be working remotely. They are not asking you that you have a W-2 type of work. So That was the solution. Like her mother, like provided the letter verification. We did help with, the specific contents she would need to have for the letter verification, and she was approved. Okay, Dragon. So yeah, so Dragon has a follow up. Um, I've got a job offer with a contract with a company as well, but the pay is beneath the 15 monthly threshold. Doesn't matter. Yeah, there you go, Dragon. That's exactly the strategy, right? Uh, Listen, in the case of our client from Tokyo, she wasn't being even paid, right? Like I mean, by her mother, but since she would need to be paid, her mother started to pay something. I don't know, like $20 an hour, like for her marketing work that she was doing for the restaurant. And in your case, it's going to be pretty much the same thing, right? Like you have a job offer that you can present as a proof of some type of work. You're going to be making less than 1,500, but you have the 18,000. So you should be good. All right, you should be good, Dragon. And of course, if you need us to, streamline the process, that's what we are here for. Particularly for content creators, I think we are a very good match. We can we can remove the guesswork from your application and make sure that you are approved. All right, Dragon. I hope that was helpful. Again, sharing just some news to make our live stream lighter so we don't talk just about legal stuff. I'm going to share an interesting subject, particularly for those of you who are in countries such as the United States and countries in Europe, okay? And I'm sharing here my screen. This is UOL. It's one of the main news portals in Brazil. And the news over here is that Uber is joining, or is like, let's say, copying 99. 99 is another, ride share app. And now they are offering, believe it or not, they are offering ride share on motorcycles. Okay, so this is already common, like in the northeast of Brazil. But now, the big news is that they are going to start to offer in São Paulo. And, the reason for that to be such news, like, first thing is that you never see that in the United States, right? Like, I mean, how can a motorcycle provide Uber services? But that's something that is being happening in Brazil for a while now. And they are starting to offer in São Paulo. São Paulo has a very chaotic type of traffic, right? So that's the big surprise over here. I understand, like in a small town, people, doing ride sharing on a motorcycle, maybe not so concerning, but in São Paulo, I mean, that's a very heavy and chaotic traffic, and people using motorcycles for ride sharing. That's something, let's say, unusual, to say the least, right? And the underlying news over here is that like there is a dispute between the city of São Paulo's mayor and those ride sharing companies, right? Because like in theory, of course, like motorcycles, they are allowed, to ride in through São Paulo. There is a lot of delivery through motorcycles historically, like for several, maybe for a couple of decades or 3 decades by now. But ride sharing is something new for sure. Okay, so there you go. One more piece of news. Right, let's see. All right, Dragon, I will be hiring you to represent me soon. I just need to decide once and for all whether or not I'm doing the process here in Milan or in Brazil. Absolutely, Dragon. Just remember, if you apply outside of Brazil, you're going to need to present health insurance, right? It needs to be health insurance with coverage in Brazil. So, like we used to say, if you do have health insurance with coverage in Brazil, yes, you have access to this route. If you don't have it, then my recommendation is for you to apply in Brazil for sure. Because if you buy health insurance, usually it starts at something like 500 euros, uh, and it's just a waste of money because this health insurance doesn't actually provide like they provide you with a refund if you use the services in Brazil, but they don't provide you with upfront coverage. So our recommendation from the health insurance perspective is that our clients first secure, the residency through the digital nomad, and then, just get the same health insurance that we as Brazilians have, and you're gonna pay a fraction of the price, and it's gonna be health insurance that actually works. Okay, so that's the nuance. If you apply, like in Milan, or to any consulates, it doesn't matter the country, if it is Italy or elsewhere, Europe, if it is any country in Europe or the United States or abroad, anyhow, you're gonna need to present health insurance, again, with coverage in Brazil. And the second thing we don't like about consulates is that there is more discretion in terms of how they evaluated the requirements. They are not really like immigration workers. They are consular workers that have to handle sometimes immigration work. So super common to see decisions that seem wrong from our perspective. Right now, if when you're filing in Brazil, you're filing specifically with the immigration department in Brazil, highly specialized, right? Like a team of immigration analysts. I'm not saying they are perfect, right? Just far from it. But at least you are able to better forecast if an application is going to be successful or not. Dragon is commenting, motorcycle ride share sounds crazy to me. Exactly. São Paulo is a chaotic vibe, but I love it. I get that the motorcycles would allow for more maneuverability in traffic. Yes, Dragon. But, that's the reason. Like, I don't recall the stats, but I think every single day in São Paulo, you have, motorcycle riders dying from car crashes, right? Because something bizarre in São Paulo, again, or not just São Paulo, the entire country, motorcycles, they are allowed to ride between the cars, right? Like, so in the United States, you are not allowed to ride a motorcycle between the lanes, right? Like, you gotta occupy a lane just like you were a car, okay? Not in Brazil. In Brazil, like, again, those kind of, crazy things we have in our society. So motorcycles, they are going to ride between the lanes, okay? Now, in some cities, just like São Paulo, sometimes they are creating like a narrow lane between the two lanes to the left side of a larger avenue. But it's just chaotic, and the motorcycles, they they do a lot of crazy things in the traffic, and not surprisingly, unfortunately, there is a high incidence of death of motorcycle riders, right? Just because of this kind of dynamic, right? But I guess it works, they provide, delivery service throughout the city, throughout the country. It's very convenient, very affordable, right? Nothing like you would see in the United States. You could have something delivered, across the city, I don't know, sometimes for $5, right? Like, you can have something delivered across the city, by a motorcycle rider for $5. It's just very convenient. I think convenient for the business users, right? Not for the motorcycle riders who don't make much money, but it is what it is. Just sharing a piece of reality in São Paulo. William Frost, hey William, it has been a while. So good to see you over here. William says, "Hi, Luciano. Thank you for all the great content. You're welcome. Thank you for showing up, William. While it would be cheaper to get a motorbike ride, I don't think that it is safe in places like São Paulo and Rio. The insurance situation must be complex." Yeah, William. It's just like, I mean, it's just, and that's why, I mean, the mayor of São Paulo is resisting. Is saying, listen, this is nonsense. Not for São Paulo, right? And what's surprising me is that Uber is like, fighting back, saying, you know what, we're gonna do it anyhow. And Uber, is usually more conservative. It's like an international company. They have a brand, so I don't know. I mean, it's very interesting to me that Uber is joining the crowd, right? But again, it is what it is. Insurance is usually expensive in São Paulo. Yes. Something interesting, William, just because you're mentioning about insurance and you're probably thinking about personal injury awards or, verdicts or settlements in Brazil, they are substantially lower than you would see in the United States. And maybe this is across the globe, right? Like, I mean, the US is more like an exception. But, like, I mean, I was sharing in a consultation another day. We have a client, like a Brazilian client in California, and we got him a settlement, right? Like, I mean, I'm not providing his personal information, just providing generics. And we got him like a compensation for 200,000 US dollars for a toe that was cut off by the condo door, right? Like, we got him a compensation for 200,000 US dollars. And in Brazil, not long ago, someone lost a leg in a traffic accident. I mean, I don't recall if it was a motorcycle, but it could be very well a motorcycle accident. And I think this person got as compensation 40,000 reais, which would be like, I don't know, 7,000 US dollars, right? Like, so, of course, it also depends on like the culpability of the person who caused the accident. But here you go, right? Like a toll in California is worth like $200,000, and a leg in Brazil, it's worth like $7,000, right? Like, I mean, I think that tells a lot about how our society sees, like, the value of human life. But again, I mean, there are so many upsides in Brazil, but there are many challenges for sure, and like those values associated with personal injury, they are just like, I mean, I think we're talking about two extremes, right? Like, I mean, the United States, things are just like out of proportion. I mean, just exaggerated, and in Brazil is the opposite. I mean, they're just bottom low. Like, I mean, they should be more, right? So maybe a balance, right? To find a balance between the United States and Brazil would be ideal. All right, Dragon, I recognize there are pros and cons to doing the process abroad versus in Brazil. Yeah, you watch our videos. Glad you know that. I'm very likely to do so in Brazil. Thank you. I ask two more questions. Absolutely, Dragon. Keep the questions coming. Dragon says motorcycles are dangerous even with the strictest restrictions. I had a teacher in high school who was a mortician, and he would share the worst stories from motor victims. Wear pads and helmet always, exactly. And even still, it can be exactly. So I used to ride motorcycles, and not surprisingly, it was like in my kind of teenager years. So probably from age 15 to 22. We're talking about 7 years. I think I had about 7 different motorcycles. At a certain point, I think I had 2 motorcycles at once, and I did suffer some injuries, and eventually, I realized it wasn't worth the trouble. Okay, and then I retired from the scene, and I never wanted to ride a motorcycle again. And like I have I have a couple of boys, and I tell them, listen, you can ask me for lots of things, but not for a motorcycle. I don't want to see, my children riding a motorcycle for sure. All right, Sarah Liddy, welcome, Sarah. So glad to see you back. Hi again. How much money per person is needed to get the retirement residency? Sarah, I assume you're talking about Brazil. Okay, we usually address over here um, both Portugal and Brazil, but of course, like Brazil represents the majority of our viewers, so I'm gonna go with Brazil. And in Brazil, basically, the immigration is going to be looking at the applicant for the retirement, and the minimum is going to be 2,000 US dollars. Okay, 2,000 US dollars, and it must be most of this $2,000 should be traditional retirement income, right? And by traditional retirement income, I'm talking about Social Security, disability, pension funds. Like if you got other type of stuff like stocks, investment funds, then they are not traditional. Brazil would allow you to use most of the 2,000 or to present, most of the 2,000 as traditional retirement income. And if there is a gap, let's say if you can present only 1,500 to traditional retirement income, the remainder or the remaining 500, then you could show something that is not traditional, but still passive, but is still passive income, such as property rental. Okay. Now, very interesting to mention, like, for Portugal, when you have a dependents, they are going to add an amount to the minimum required, right? So for Portugal, usually the wife or, the husband, meaning the spouse, is going to add an additional 50% to the minimum requirement, and children are going to add 30%. We don't have that in Brazil, okay? So in Brazil, basically, you would get the retirement for the main applicant, and then you would apply for the so-called family reunion visa or residency, right? It's also called family reunification. I don't like this name. I think just family reunion makes sense enough. And for once you apply for the family reunion route, it could be a visa, it could be a residency. Basically, Brazil is just going to say, listen, show me some kind of income, okay? And whatever income you show, they are going to be good, usually, and they are going to approve the dependents as well. All right, okay, so Dragon, okay, my question about residence. I was told that securing an Airbnb for a year could be used. I would use it for the process and then cancel after we've secured everything and I can rent a proper place. So if we're talking about Brazil, there is no need for you to secure Airbnb for a year. Most of our clients, for the digital nomad, they are actually using Airbnb. Now, whatever you have from Airbnb is not going to be compliant for most Brazilian federal police stations. That's where you go when you're going to get the resident card, and they're going to ask you for a proof of residence, physical residence, right? And in this case, what we get that's compliant throughout the country is going to be a letter from the owner of the property stating that you are staying in the property, and the owner of the property is going to need to, sign this kind of affidavit and notarize the affidavit. And in addition to that, of course, the owner is going to need to produce a utility bill. Okay, so utility bill plus the notarized letter is going to be a very solid proof of address when you are attending this appointment at the Brazilian Federal Police. Okay. Yes, William Frost. Interesting comparison between a toe and a leg. Two extreme places in terms of compensation in litigation. Exactly. It's is astonishing, right? Like I mean, like I mean, it makes us feel bad, right? Like because it just sounds like Brazil doesn't value life. But the other take on it, right? Like I mean, I went to the University of São Paulo Law School, and that's where most of the justices, many of the Brazilian presidents came from, and they are very well versed in theory, in general, law theory. And when we discuss like this matter of the low compensation for personal injury, one of the reasons why like the scholars from the legal field they say, listen, Brazil doesn't attach a dollar sign to life. It's not us. It's not our culture, right? So it's weird. It's almost like we say, like we don't want to incentivize, like attorneys or people to start getting money for a tragedy, right? But I think it's a very naive kind of interpretation because, I mean, if you lose a leg, right? Like, I mean, your range of occupations of work is going to reduce dramatically. And yes, there is a need for a dollar tag, right? Like, I mean, are you just going to say, I'm sorry, too bad? Like, I mean, you can cash those kind of feelings, right? But there was one of the explanations I heard from scholars more than once. It's not the dollar sign attached to a tragedy is not compatible with the Brazilian legal system, right? Like, I mean, it is what it is. All right. Dragon says, yeah, the pads and helmets can protect you from full contact, blunt force trauma. So even if you really follow the protections, you can still really get hurt. Yeah, absolutely, Dragon. I mean, you are completely exposed, right? Like, I mean, and if you are driving fast or another car, even if you're not riding fast, right? Like if there is a car, like a drunk driver and they hit you, like, I mean, chances of a catastrophic outcome are really high. All right, Sarah is confirming, yes, for Brazil, I'm looking to go with my husband, so I wanted to see if 2,000 was enough for both of us or if we needed 4K. Sarah, so if one of you qualifies, you can, have this one applying for the retirement route. The other one can piggyback as the family reunion visa or residency, right? Now, if both of you qualify, of course, like I would recommend you both to get the main one, right? Because the one piggybacking on the main applicant, like he's completely dependent, right? So God forbid if something happens to the main applicant, like the second one immediately loses the residency rights, right? So usually whenever you have two applicants that would qualify for the main visa or residency, that's going to be the preferred route, all right? But if you don't both qualify, then, like you can have one with the main application, the second one with the visa reunion. Now, just remember, like you can borrow income from your husband and vice versa. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Of course, if you have, let's say, a joint property that you're renting, and you get the property rental income, this income in theory could be assigned to either of you, right? So, yeah, there are there are strategies that we can use when applying for the residency. And once you get closer to this point, I think, a consultation would be good because then we can discuss your retirement income lines one by one and see what type of strategy we would recommend. Okay, Sarah. All right, Dragon. All right, Dragon. I was told that securing. All right, this one we answered. So you don't need to secure for a year. I mean, it could be like a couple of months, Dragon. And as long as you get the letter from the landlord, you're good. All right. William, I use it 99 in Brazil, and it does seem to be cheaper in general. In the UK, there is no other app to challenge Uber, and it seems to have a monopoly on passengers, but for delivery, there are options. I know there are a couple of options in Europe, right, William? I know there is another one that is used throughout Europe. I'm surprised they are not in the UK. I forgot the name. I think it's like at least the icon for the service is like green, and it's super affordable. Like you can use throughout Europe. Like I remember I did use, like in Portugal. I did use in Ukraine, in Turkey. Maybe one of you know the app I'm talking about, but I don't recall in the UK, to use anything other than Uber. And we didn't. So in Brazil, Uber is also pretty cheap, right? Like 99, it does beat like Uber very often in terms of price, but the even Uber price, I mean, it's unbelievably cheap in Brazil. Sometimes, I feel bad for the drivers. I give some tip using the app. Super common. Like in São Paulo, like we have an office. Our office is in downtown, so we move. Like whenever we are moving around, is usually also close by. And most of the rides, they are going to be around the 10 reais range. So that means less than $2, right, per ride, right? Now, of course, if you're going to, ride, for instance, when we ride from downtown São Paulo to the international airport, then we may have to pay, I don't know, like 120 reais, sometimes 150. So we're talking about $20, $25. For a trip that sometimes is going to take like an hour and a half. Okay, so pretty cheap. Uber in Brazil, right? Right, Dragon. So between getting the visa with you, there will be a time in which I can secure proper housing before the next step with the police. My concern is of trying to secure housing abroad unseen. Yes, I mean, my recommendation, right? Like, I mean, is for you to get like, get a place for 2 weeks, right? That's usually the time that you need to arrive in the city. I don't know, like to unpack the most basic items, change time zone, to acclimate with the city. And after 2 weeks, if you decided to stay in the same city, then you may want to do an Airbnb for a longer term. It could be like a couple of months, and it's also going to depend on where you are in the process of applying. Many of our clients, they started the work of gathering the documents even before leaving their countries of origin. So, if you start like a month and a half before coming to Brazil, in theory, we could potentially file your application with a month. So if you, get a Uber place, if you get an Airbnb place for a couple of months, usually it's going to be enough for you to have a relationship with the landlord to ask for this letter, right? And for our clients, many times we contact the landlord ourselves because then we can explain, listen, we are, a law firm, we just need this letter so our client can, apply for the residency. So we also assist on this behalf. But usually it's not a good idea. You're absolutely right to secure a place for the long run before you are in the country, right? Like, I mean, I think you should know the neighborhood in which you want to stay. Whenever people do those decisions, they take those decisions from abroad, usually they regret down the road, right? Like they say, well, I could have something better. I don't really like this neighborhood, or, maybe I want to go to another city. So my recommendation is usually, get the first 15 days because you can acclimate, and then from there, you can maybe have a second period of time, and until you decide where you want to settle, right? Like, and once you decide where you want to settle, then yes, you could be doing even like a 1 year term, a traditional rental. Okay. All right, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for participating. That's helpful to know about the retirement income. I have a separate question. Can people reapply for a new digital nomad visa after their 2 years are up? Sarah, so there is no current regulation addressing a second renewal, okay? But we do have clients getting the second renewal, right? So there is no straightforward answer, because when the digital nomad was created under President Bolsonaro, the federal government said we're gonna issue new regulation in the future addressing the renewal. And guess what? Now President Bolsonaro is no longer president. We have a new administration, and the new administration never issued new regulation addressing the renewal. So basically, there is a vacuum, there is a gap in terms of regulation, and all we can tell is what we see going on as we speak, which could change at any time, right? So what we see going on as we speak is that people are getting their digital nomad renewal for a second time, all right? And like, again, that doesn't mean it's going to be your case. It's going to be the case for anyone applying in the future. But as of today, we do have clients getting the renewal for a second time. And we would assume that the government is going to continue with this strategy, at least for the short term. All right, Sarah. All right. Here is William. William wants to get me in trouble, right, William? If I go too further into this answer, I'm gonna lose half of my audience, right? So let's see how I can answer. William is saying, do you think the Trump administration will have a positive effect on the United States-Brazil relations? I know you love talking politics in the state of Texas, right? Yeah, I mean, you know that the current Brazilian administration is like is a left oriented party. President Lula, like kind of antagonic to President Bolsonaro, the prior president of Brazil, which was highly aligned with Trump, right? So now, yes, there are news in Brazil that Lula even said preemptively, right? Lula is our current president, left-oriented. He said, well, we don't want to fight with the United States, right? Like, I mean, trying to be accommodating. And he was gracious, because he even said, I wish, the Trump administration success and so on. And but Trump is aligned with President Bolsonaro, right? And currently, President Bolsonaro cannot run, for the elections, because the Brazilian Supreme Court has, decided a case against President Bolsonaro, and said he cannot, he cannot run for office again. And it's so interesting how Brazil follows the U.S. reality, right? Because it's almost like President Bolsonaro is some sort of President Trump, and President Lula would be like President Joe Biden, right? Just a little bit younger. And so from an expectation point of view, I think President Bolsonaro would win the next election, just like President Trump won in the United States, right? Now, again, the Brazilian Supreme Court, which is highly aligned with President Lula, has decided that President Bolsonaro cannot run, right? But if the vast majority of Brazilians want President Bolsonaro back, I mean, that's a concerning state of affairs, right? Like, basically, the Brazilian Supreme Court is like, I would say, like precluding the Brazilian people from electing President Bolsonaro. And we have news that maybe the United States is going to pressure Brazil in order to remove this kind of bar to President Bolsonaro to run for office again. So that's what I think is going to happen, right? I think it's very probable that the Trump administration is going to do something to pressure Brazil to allow President Bolsonaro to run again. And I can tell you, I don't have any, doubt that President Bolsonaro would be elected, okay? Because, again, just like in the United States, like in the last election, President Lula beat like President Bolsonaro for a tiny margin, and it was mostly because of the northeast of Brazil, in which traditionally President Lula and his party have spent a lot of money on, social programs, which they do have a good impact, by instance. And so, like most of Brazil actually voted for President Bolsonaro, but just the Northeast, like the Northeast was like outside the curve, like they voted for President Lula, massively, like, I don't know, 90% of people would vote for President Lula. So the remainder of the country is kind of upset saying, listen, these guys, because they got the money from the government, they voted for President Lula, right? Of course, it's not, the reality is never as simple as that, but I'm just sharing the narrative that we have here in Brazil. I personally that governments, they are not always in power. I like when there is a recycling of people, right? Because the longer they stay in power, I would say, the higher the trend of, corruption, of, bad decisions. People get accommodated. They don't do what they should be doing, right? So I like when there is this kind of, recycling of the politicians, right? That's my take on it. That's as far as I'm going to go with it. But pretty interesting question. Thank you for asking. All right, Dragon, would you state again what the letter I need to get from my contract employer in London is? I didn't write it down because I'm so excited. Yeah, so it's a letter of verification, Dragon, and there are probably 5 components for that letter. And this letter that we provide you with a template is like a secret sauce here in our service. So once you get to the point of application, we would be glad to share the letter with you, and then you can basically just see the information that you're gonna need. We can draft it, like the letter for you, and then you send it to your employer. They sign the letter, and everything should be good. Dragon says, I have all my documents before arriving. I'm going to have all my documents before arriving there. The only thing I may not have is the documents translated from here. For now, I will now plan for Airbnb for a few months instead. I love this stream. I'm glad you're here, Dragon. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being with us. Providence, I had a great consultation with Luciano. Don't hesitate to do this. Very, very helpful. Thank you so much, Providence. I really appreciate it. Thank you for showing up. And thank you for the encouraging words, Providence. Dragon, Providence saw you in the previous stream. He's been great, even on this level. I look forward to hiring them and proceeding further. Thank you. Appreciate Dragon. Thank you so much. And in the meantime, if you guys want to also like our, our content, you can just like on YouTube. This helps with our live stream, of course, and it does help other people find our content. I really appreciate your words and support, guys. All right, Providence, I really appreciate. Providence says, Dragon, you'll be very happy. He does not hold you back in answering questions, and he does not push you into a long-term agreement. Very refreshing and honest. Thank you so much, Providence. Yes, we strive to provide, a good, honest service and do what we promise. And sometimes it's interesting, right? Like, I mean, you see so much in marketing nowadays, a lot of stuff in marketing. And I always tell, like my people, all we need to do is what we promise. So if we're selling something, we need to deliver. And as long as you do what you promise, clients are gonna be happy, and they're gonna spread the word. They are gonna come back for more. So this philosophy has been very helpful for us, and I'm so glad to see that you guys like it. All right, Sarah, super helpful feedback about the digital nomad visa. Thank you. Also, if applying for digital nomad visa via the consulate or in country, do we need birth certificates apostilled? How about bachelor's and master degrees? Sarah, so that's an interesting question. If you apply to a consulate in the United States, most of the Brazilian consulates, they are not going to ask. They are not going to ask for the apostille or apostille on the birth certificates. Okay, most consulates, consulate in Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Connecticut. Whatever birth certificate you present, they are going to be happy with it. Now, the challenge is, after you get the visa through the consulate and you are in Brazil, you're gonna need to attend an appointment at the Brazilian Federal Police. And at that appointment in particular, they are gonna ask you for the apostilled birth certificate. So nowadays, what I see going on, like if you take a look at the consulate website, they are going to say so. They're going to say, listen, we accept your birth certificate as is, but in Brazil, the Brazilian Federal Police may ask you for the apostilled version, right? And in my experience, every single police station in Brazil is going to ask you for the apostilled birth certificate. So, in my opinion, the consulate does a disservice by not enforcing the apostilled birth certificate, because they give you the visa, and then once you are in Brazil, you are in trouble, because you say, well, if the consulate gave me a thumbs up on the birth certificate, I'm good. And that's not the case, all right? So the answer is, consulate could give you the visa, but the Brazilian Federal Police is not going to give you the resident card once you are in Brazil, all right? So from this perspective, you're going to need the apostilled birth certificate anyhow. Bachelor's and master degrees, I mean, they are not part of the digital nomad visa application. Okay, like, I mean, even at the consulate level, we don't see those documents being required. So let me know, like, did you see this requirement somewhere in some type of consulate, Sarah? Just because they're not common from our experience, okay? All right. William Frost, well done. You did well on the banana skin question. You only lost 25% of your followers. So it was a success, William. I didn't want to lose 50%. 25 I can handle. Only joking, of course. I know that, William. Yes, it is true that Brazil follows the U.S., at times too much like the January 6 riots. Exactly. We had ours, right? I think ours was on the 8th, if I'm not mistaken. But we had everything, right? Like even, people trying to invade, like, I mean, in the U.S., I think it was the Congress, and in Brazil, it was actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was the, like the residency for the president, right? Like, I mean, or it was the Congress. I don't recall anymore, but because like in Brasilia, they are very close. It's not like in the United States, you have substantially different locations for those things. Like in Brazil, we have Brasilia. Brasilia, by the way, is a city that was designed from the scratch. So Brazil's capital was in Rio de Janeiro. And eventually, Rio de Janeiro was already big, several million, I'm not sure if 6 or 7 million like inhabitants back then. And then, Brazil said, it's not working really well. Let's move somewhere else. And ideally in a place that we want to develop. So naturally, because it's the capital of the country, like money and investment and people are going to follow along. And that's how Brasilia was born. And for the government, so everything is like in a kind of centralized area, and you have like every single building, right? Like the Congress, we call it the palace of the president. You have like the Supreme Court. They are all like within walking distance from each other. It's very interesting, right? Like, I mean, Brasilia, another, like comment on Brasilia, it's a great city to live in because it's not crowded. And again, it was designed like from scratch, so it was everything was planned ahead of time. So there is no heavy traffic. There is ample space and room for everything. It's a really delightful experience. I like Brasilia a lot. Okay, some people don't like it because of course like there are downsides. Very interesting that in Brasilia, from Friday to Monday, it's I would say it's excessively not peaceful but slow because most people in Brasilia are naturally working with the government at some level or for some type of project or whatever, and so they usually travel to Brasilia on Monday, either Monday evening or Tuesday in the morning, and then they're returning from Brasilia usually on Thursday in the evening or Friday in the morning. And then, because you don't have like a large number of people in the weekend, then Brasilia is dead. Like, I mean, there are no shows, there is nothing fun to do, right? So, very interesting city. I mean, if you have an opportunity to visit, again, like, I mean, and the architecture is amazing, by the way, right? Like, I mean, we have some great architects in Brazil. One of them is Oscar Niemeyer, like he's an international architect, and he did design most of the buildings in Brasilia, like the buildings particularly related to the powers, right? So we're talking about the executive power, the legislative, and of course the judiciary. Everything planned from the scratch. Really, really interesting city, right? That's something that people usually miss just because they're more excited about Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Northeast, Amazon, but also worth a trip for sure. All right, Christopher, good to see you, Christopher. I'm sorry you've answered this before now, but does it matter how much time has passed between the document's apostille date and when the document is presented to a Brazilian authority? No worries at all, Christopher. There is no, lifetime, right? I mean, there is no timeline for you to use an apostille. Usually, the immigration is more concerned about the underlying document, right? So they're not really concerned about the apostille. I'm gonna give an example. If you have your background check, your criminal records from 6 months ago, this is not going to be accepted, not because immigration is concerned about the apostille date. This is going to be denied because like the criminal records, they must be not older than 90 days. All right, so that's going to be the reason for the immigration, not accepting your criminal records. Birth certificate, on the other hand, if you have something like from 2 years ago, they're going to have no issue with accepting your birth certificate with an apostille. Like, I mean, birth certificate from 2 years ago, apostille from 7 years ago, no worries, right? Like the apostille means that the document is legit from the immigration perspective. Document is legible, it shows your parents' names on it. You're good, okay? So it's more on a case-by-case basis. But the only one that they are really picky about the timeline is going to be the criminal records, right? And for a reason, okay? Because They want to make sure that this document is fresh enough to represent your current status in terms of criminal history, if you will. All right, Sarah is clarifying. I asked about the degrees because it's commonly requested from other countries with their digital nomad visa standards. That's true, Sarah. That's true. That's very true. Portugal, for instance, right? Like for Portugal, you would be welcome to provide your, education credentials. So that's an interesting analogy, Sarah, but not for Brazil. All right, not for Brazil. William Frost, have to go. Luciano, many thanks for the live stream. Keep up the good work. Thank you for showing up, William. Next live stream is going to be on Sunday. I hope to see you back. Thank you for participating, William. Dragon, which city would you suggest and why for a musician between Rio and Sao Paulo? I had intended to choose Sao Paulo before, but I have a cousin in Rio, and that's also an option. Curious to hear your thoughts. So, Rio and Sao Paulo, they are kind of close by, Dragon. It's like a 5-hour drive, or if you're flying, it would be like a 30-minute flight, right? A 30-minute flight between those two cities. Sao Paulo is like the business center of the country, and there is much more money and people willing to pay for arts in Sao Paulo than anywhere else in the country, right? Like, Sao Paulo is just, I don't know, I think it's better than New York City. New York City was good in the past. Now it's kind of, like out of control from so many perspectives. But Sao Paulo is still well managed to a certain extent. So there is a lot of, activities and things for musicians, for, actors, and so on, right? Now, Rio de Janeiro is even more oriented to arts in general. It is just that Rio doesn't have as money flowing around as you find in Sao Paulo. Okay, Rio is in my opinion, is a work of art by itself. The city is unbelievable, right? It doesn't matter how long you've been in Rio de Janeiro, if it is your first time, your 10th time, your 100th time. It's always amusing, like when you're driving around, when you are by the coast. Like, the city is just amazingly beautiful, right? And that reflects on arts and music in general. So I think it's easy to say that the most significant production in Brazil from a music perspective comes from Rio de Janeiro. Okay, no denial about that. We do have, like some lyrics writers. We do have, like musicians. We have, singers from Sao Paulo. There is no shortage of talent in Sao Paulo, but Rio is still far ahead in terms of creation. So if you are a musician and this type of inspiring environment is important to you, I think that Rio is going to be a better choice, okay? And then once you leave those two cities, yes, you still have a couple of other options. I don't know, Belo Horizonte, maybe Curitiba, Florianópolis, but, not nearly comparable. I would say not comparable to Rio and Sao Paulo. We have, like a really interesting production of music in the Northeast. People are more creative in the Northeast, but the infrastructure is really, really behind, right? So really tough for musicians. But if you are a person like you're identifying yourself as a musician, I think that Rio is a must for you to at least try out, Dragon. Okay, and I see we are arriving at the end of our live stream today. I want to, thank everyone for your participation. Thank you, Dragon, for bringing so many interesting subjects. I hope to see you again on Sunday. I hope to see everyone on Sunday, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your Wednesday. You guys take care.